Hello again to all subscribers and listeners of this channel. Today I want to talk about how it seems that there are too many times where people have convinced themselves that ancient humans were, for lack of a better word, stupid, simple-minded idiots that barely knew where to take a dump or get food. I think ancient humans were far from that. Ancient humans all over the world, I believe, or all over planet Earth, I believe, were far more intelligent and far more capable than we give them credit for. In our arrogance, we mistakenly see the ancient man as a simpleton. Examples of the greatness of the ancients are misunderstood, underrated, etc. Or they're not even attributed to ancient man in the first place, because people don't seem to be able to connect high intelligence and high understanding of reality to the ancient human beings. And I think that needs to change immediately, especially with all the new information coming out. There's a huge difference between a lack of intelligence and a lack of knowledge. Ancient people had intelligence that I think it was pretty much at the same level that it is now with modern humans. They just didn't have the same amount of detailed knowledge of reality like we have today. But that's what I'm going to break down this video. So, without further ado, let us begin. So what is the basic premise here? The premise is that human beings have gotten smarter and much more intelligent over long periods of time, and that we're smarter today than our ancestors were thousands of years ago. Well, as far as I can see, this is very flawed thinking, and here's why. Let's get to it. Number one, how does a person measure the average human intelligence and conclude that we're smarter today than we were in the past? How is that measured? Well, let's look at this for a little bit. 1A. First and foremost, what is intelligence? Well, after doing some digging, I found that there really isn't a true consensus or a base definition for what intelligence actually is. However, there are some statements like the one I'm about to quote, and I quote from the Wall Street Journal in December 1994. The mainstream science quote, or mainstream science statement, defined intelligence more broadly as, and I quote, "Intelligence is a very general mental capability that, among other things, involves the ability to reason, plan, solve problems, think abstractly, comprehend complex ideas, learn quickly, learn from experience, and it is not merely book learning, a narrow academic skill, or test-taking smarts. Rather, it reflects a broader and deeper capability for comprehending our surroundings, catching on, making sense of things, and or figuring out what to do," unquote. Gottfredson, 1997, A, page 13. So that's a statement on it, but that's not like a clear actual definition that's agreed upon by everyone. Yet, there seem to be many scientists who either disagree with this definition or see it as not recognizing all the traits of what we call intelligence. Either way, what we call intelligence still seems to be very much an abstract idea of human behavior, not an actual thing that we can observe or measure. It seems we can only observe actions, but not the things that become actions. 1B. So if intelligence cannot be accurately agreed upon, then how can it be measured? Well, many people use the IQ, or the intelligence quotient tests, and then they derive in a number from that, which ends up being the main IQ score. But the IQ is based off of a test, and the test has had flaws with this result since day one. I won't go into detail, but I'll post links in the description, because going into that would be a whole video by itself. 1C. So if you can't define intelligence as a group, if you can't measure it, then how do you measure the intelligence of an ancient man who's been dead for thousands of years, and you compare it to today's humans and claim that today's humans are smarter than the ancient humans, when you can't even really all the way accurately measure today's humans' intelligence. Like, it doesn't make sense. How does one measure the intelligence of people who died generations ago to begin with? None of this can really be a factual statement when you realize none of this can be measured in either population. You can't really measure everybody's intelligence like with the ruler today, and you definitely cannot measure the intelligence of entire populations from thousands of years ago. There's no compare or contrast. These are some of the basic flaws in trying to compare and contrast the ancients with us in terms of how smart everyone was. Number 2, there's a difference between ignorance and stupidity, or ignorance and unintelligence. Let's define these terms. Ignorance is the state of being ignorant. And just ignorant or being ignorant is simply lacking knowledge, lacking information, lacking the know-how or the instruction, usually pertaining to a specific subject matter. Not necessarily a broad view, but more so to specific tasks. Unintelligent is the lacking of intelligence, but how this definition has a problem. Because to go further, we have to go back up to number 1, where defining intelligence was a challenge for decades and still kind of a challenge today. But the closest I can get is the lacking of thinking, or the lacking of abstraction, problem-solving skills, inherent in the human mind. That's the best I could find when I did the research. But one thing that I can say is that ancient man is far closer to ignorance of his world than he is to true unintelligence, and here's why. When one considers the things that ancient man had to do to survive, it becomes quickly evident that all over the world, the average human had more than enough actual thinking skills to survive in the very hostile environment around him. Let's go further. Number 3, ancient man didn't know many things, but he did have intelligence enough and common sense enough and knowledge enough to do things that were sensible. 3a, ancient man became proficient pretty much all over the planet in agriculture. Ancient man spent thousands of years telling time, counting plants, tilling the land, herding cattle, fetching water, planting seeds, growing crops, harvesting his yield, storing it away, measuring the length of the year, and doing many more somewhat simple yet very difficult things in order to survive being on the planet Earth that required tools, construction, measurement, mathematics, etc. 3b, tool making. Humanity has always been a tool making and tool using organism. From axes to shovels, forks, knives, daggers, swords, plows, shoes, wheels, pottery, spoons, etc. If one were to realize the complexity and the difficulty of what it takes to make these type of tools, it becomes quite evident that human beings always had a capacity to construct a new device out of materials for later use. To build with reason was always in our ability as a species. 3c, government systems. From the Commission peoples in Northeast Africa to the Babylonians to ancient Americans, the Chinese Empire, as well as newly discovered civilizations that take human history further back, such as the sites of Göbekli Tepe. Humans have been figuring out how to manage large populations for ages, believe it or not. What we call cities are much older than people like to think. They're finding evidence of cities going back more than 10,000 years. But again, I'll link in the description. You'll see what I'm talking about. So many things that we think are modern or were created within the last 1,000 years may not be true. These things may have been created tens of thousands of years further back than we think they have. 3D, large stone structures. The Pyramid of Giza, China's Great Wall, the Great Wall of Benin, the Great Zimbabwe in Southern Africa, the Serpent Mounds found all over North America, the pyramids of Southern Mexico, the Angkor Wat stone structure of Cambodia. All these things are artistic or acoustic or energy centered, maybe religious, spiritual centers for whatever they were using them for, that required, again, skill, mathematics, planning, certain levels of technology back then that we're still not really understanding nor respecting. 3E, ancient technologies. Technologies like the Antikythera mechanism. Sailing ships go back much further in time than we think they do. And there's more evidence for that also. Glass lenses, what might have been magnifying lenses, complex calendar systems, etc. The list goes on and on of ancient man creating beautiful stone and earth structures and awesome devices that could not possibly have been built by quote unquote dumb primitive people. Number 4, the fallacy that modern man is smarter. No, modern man isn't smarter. He just has more information and more exquisite toys to play with. 4A, today the average human being reads more written words in a month than a human being would have read in the entire lifetime 2 centuries ago. Is that being smarter, or is that just gaining more information? 4B, the average human being doesn't even use math anymore on a regular basis. And what do I mean? When we have to do basic calculations using mathematics like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, we don't actually do the math anymore, if you notice. A lot more people are using computers, calculators, cash registers, etc. to do these calculations for us. Ancient man used pebbles, stones, beads, the abacus, ancient devices similar to the slide rule to make mathematical calculations. And he actually had to do this counting and measuring in his head using this tool as an aid. This tool made it easy for him to do the math. He still had to do much of the math in his head and use this tool to do the math in front of him in a physical way to check his answers. These type of devices actually took logic and thinking to use them. Today's calculators, you're just pressing the buttons. You're pressing buttons today versus back then you actually had to do the counting and measuring and mathematical work yourself. So something like using the abacus was something that actually took learning and skill to learn how to do correctly. Are we smarter because of our use of calculators and computers? Or are we just doing math faster because the machine's doing all the work? 4C. Consider that much of the technology that we use today was invented by literally less than 10,000 people throughout all of human history, at least the past 1,000 years or so. And these devices are manufactured by only a few million people in a factory somewhere in the world. Does that actually equate to the other 7.5 billion people using these devices? Does that mean that we're all smarter? I think if we go back and really examine this idea that we modern humans are smarter simply because of the abundance of high technology, most humans back then knew how to survive. A much larger proportion of people back then knew how to make tools. They even probably could have run small government surprisingly well. Most people today could never manufacture today's technology that we unfairly, I think, connect to our average intelligence. Also, something that really needs to be thought about, so I really want people to sit down and think about this. Consider if we had a Stephen Hawking level intelligence in a person who was alive in the year 3000 BC, what would that, I think, 160 plus IQ person, what would that genius level person do with their time? Most likely, they'll learn how to grow food efficiently so they don't starve to death. Believe it or not, our capabilities are severely influenced by the environment that we're in. With this example, it becomes painfully obvious that human beings back then could very well have been just as intelligent as human beings are now, but they couldn't do as much with that intelligence outside of survival because life was harder back then. So you can be smart all you want. If you live in an environment where you need farming, guess what? You're gonna farm. Your 150 IQ guy is gonna farm. Your guy with the 75 IQ is gonna farm. They're both gonna farm, grow food, and eat. So that way they don't starve. It's very simple. But instead, we in our arrogance assume that the person was not very smart because they didn't have a portable device back then. It's like, that doesn't really seem fair to him. He might really be that smart, but again, what can he do with it in that environment, in that time? Number 5. Ancient man was far more advanced than we give him credit for. I already broke this down a little bit in one of the earlier parts. But like as stated in 3D, there are many ancient superstructures made out of stone that with today's technology, as far as I know, they were never really replicated. The pyramids of Giza being one of the most notable examples. But people are also stumped by the pyramids of Mexico, the Easter Island Moai head statues, the Stonehenge Circle in England, etc. None of these has ever actually been replicated to the same extent with the same exact materials in the modern age with today's technology. Again, we can convince ourselves that we're more advanced in technological complexity and informative accuracy. But I personally believe we need to stop fooling ourselves into believing we have a supposedly higher intelligence than we did back then just because of this higher technology that we possess. Any idiot can play with a smartphone. Again, also, another thing that people need to think about when they have this idea of advancing intelligence. If intelligence has risen by a fraction of an IQ point continuously in every generation, then one needs to understand that at some point, sometime thousands of years ago, the average IQ across the globe would have been below 0. So, yeah, I don't know how that would work. You can do the math yourself. Here's an example. Go backwards in time and reduce the IQ average or the average IQ score around the world by 1/5 of a deviation every generation. And a generation is roughly 20 years or so. And if you do the math, after about 8,000 years or so, you get a below 0 IQ. As in, I guess that person is as smart as a fish or whatever. I don't know how that makes sense, that the intelligence has raised every generation since the dawn of time. That doesn't make sense for a species that's 200,000 years old. So it's either that or I severely missed something. Number 6. If ancient man wasn't as smart, he would have died very easily and we wouldn't be here. Again, humanity is roughly 200,000 years old. And as far as I can see, the human brain appeared to have reached its full physical development very early within that history. So 190 something, 200,000 years ago, the human skull and the human brain were already developed to a point where it was identical to what the human brain and the human skull look like right now. Yet we're led to believe that human beings only got smarter within the last few thousand years of existence. Again, as far as I can see, that makes no sense whatsoever. In conclusion, I strongly believe that if we can't accurately define nor agree on what intelligence actually is, therefore we can't really measure it, and we end up underestimating ancient man's achievements if we continue to unfairly link high technology with high intelligence. Again, any idiot can play with a smartphone. It doesn't mean anything. If we cannot actually recreate to a very high accuracy the structures of the ancients that they built with stone, and if we don't accept that human beings had to be smart enough in order to survive on this planet filled with obstacles and difficulties, and human beings had to do this for 200,000 years, if we keep accepting all this nonsense, then we will continue to have a flawed look at our own species' capabilities. And we will continue to have a warped and distorted view of our species' history. Something that I think does not serve us. We need some humility about where we're going, some mind opening about where our ancestors came from, and more accurate knowledge about what human beings truly are, in my estimation. I stand by this statement. If ancient man was so unintelligent, we human beings, Homo sapiens sapiens, would not have made it this far. At least that's how I view it. That's all for now. Please like, subscribe, share, and donate to support this channel. You have a nice day. I'm out. Peace.